Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'd like to call the meeting of the Montecito Planning Commission on May 15th to order. If everybody would please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Have our TV coverage announcement.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, Commissioners. Montecito Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County of Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV, Channel 20 at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, San Maria, and Orca areas. Rebroadcast of Montecito Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 5 p.m. on CSB TV, Channel 20. Today's hearing will also be streamed live on the county's website and will be available for download in a day or two. And thank you. So I think that we went a little bit, we added the administrative oath.
Yes.
And I believe Ms. Alexander and Ms. De La Guerra are here whenever you're ready.
All right, very good. Well, this morning we have the pleasure of welcoming another person to our ranks to bring us to full strength. We're going to have the administration of the oath of office to our newly appointed colleague, Mr. Ron Police. So please, I'd like to recognize representatives of Supervisor Doss's office who are here. If you go to the podium, please.
How are you again?
Good to see you again. All right, I'll have you raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Ron Police,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance
I would do true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California.
and the Constitution of the State of California.
That I take this obligation freely
That I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion.
or purpose of evasion.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge
I will and faithfully discharge
the duties upon which
the duties upon which
I'm about to enter.
I'm about to enter.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, congratulations and welcome to the Montecito Planning Commission as a commissioner. For those members of our community and those who are here, maybe you might want to just say a few words by way of background or introduction of yourself to the community, to those who don't know you.
Well, I've been
Turn on your microphone.
I've been a resident of Santa Barbara County for about 40 years, and I've had a home in Montecito for about 25. My background is basically building infrastructure across the Southwest and Western states, and with a little time spent with my graduate degree in psychology. Otherwise, I'm just a common Montecito resident that's here to volunteer and help you guys out and the county. Thank you.
Thank you. I think by way of background, both your professional experience in construction and infrastructure and also your background in psychology will serve you well on this commission. So welcome, and we're pleased to have you join us. All right, we'll go to our roll call, please.
Commissioner Kupiec.
Here.
Commissioner Sanauer.
Here.
Commissioner Puliche.
Here.
And Chair Newman.
Pleasant.
Thank you. For the record, Commissioner Keller is absent today.
Understood. Thank you. All right, next we'll go to our agenda status report, please.
Good morning, Commissioners. Welcome, Commissioner Puliche, to the Montecito Planning Commission. We're excited to have you on board. In regards to our agenda status report today, we have one item on the consent agenda, which is the government code conformity, the flood control acquisition of property on Park Lane. Then there's several items on the standard agenda. We have one item of discretionary action by the Montecito Planning Commission, which is a dwelling or a zoning variance. And then we have listed on the agenda reports from the Montecito Water District and the Montecito Sanitary District as a resiliency report is listed. And then we have the standard briefing on the Thomas Fire and debris flow report, just to update the commissioners quickly on that item. So that's the status of our agenda. Staff is here and ready to present on all items before you today.
All right, thank you for that. I think we have a succinct meeting today. We'll be able to adjourn well before noon. All right, next we'll go to the projection report, please.
Chair and members of the commission, on the projection report, when we look at our next hearing, which is listed as June 19th, there are several items listed on that. There were several items listed there in regards to telecom projects. However, staff has received preliminary information from those applicants that they may be requesting those be moved to July. So at this time, we don't have that definitively set. We have some agreements under federal regulations that we need to make sure is in order to make sure we're compliant with the shot clocks and timing for approval and review of telecom projects. But we will know within the next week or two the status of those coming to hearing in June. Otherwise, they would be going to our hearing in July, which is on July 17th. And there is the Casa Dorinda Open Space Management Plan, which is in compliance with the condition of approval for the commission to receive and file a report on the status of that management plan. And then following that, our next hearing was going to be on August 21st. I think the commission at the last hearing took action to cancel that hearing in August. And then coming back in September 18th, there are no items projected at this time. And then it is noted that Chair Newman will be absent in September if we do have items projected for that hearing. So that's the projection report as of today.
Okay, thank you for that. One thing just to add by way of information to the report, I just heard yesterday from the representatives of Cox that they will be able to present and are planning to be here for the July 17th meeting to address infrastructure issues with respect to their system. And hopefully we'll hear from other utility service providers in Montecito on that date too, possibly. All right, and by the way, thank you. I was pleased to see the addition, although it's sometime in the future, of the annual review of the Casa Dorinda Open Space Plan, so thank you for that. All right, next on the agenda, we'll proceed to public comment. I don't see any speaker slips in the box. Is there anybody here from the public who would like to address the commission and bring to our attention a matter that is not on our agenda today? If so, would you come forward now, please? All right, seeing no one, we will then move forward and close public comment. Next, we'll start with Planning Commissioners' informal reports. Starting on my left, Commissioner Palucci, do you have anything to report? All right. Commissioner Senauer.
Yeah, thank you. First, I'll report that I attended on April 23rd. I'm part of the working group that is basically working with the county, the state, and the city on the Olive Mill Roundabout. The group consists of members of the referenced planning commissioners of the city and the county, Montecito, and basically Public Works. We met on the 23rd for about an hour and a half, and we discussed basically the history of the roundabout, basically its current status, and our contribution to its development, which is basically framed with lighting, signage, paving, landscape, And we discussed that there are standards that we basically are not flexible standards. They are standards that Caltrans mandates, and we can work within their mandates for the flexible elements. So it was a very, very productive meeting. It was about an hour and a half. Some of the points that we recommended that in our next meeting, which would be May 28th, that the counties and city come back with, and Public Works particularly, has to do with lighting. It was recommended that a photometric study would be appreciated and needed. An additional lighting information regarding the standards for the city and the county and for Caltrans, which are a little different. Plant material, height, and size. Size of islands. There are islands, about 5 of them, that are also referred to as pedestrian refuges. So if you're not walking on where you're supposed to in the crosswalk, you can secure this as a refuge. In any case, that was a discussion, the size of them. And signage, wayfare signage, et cetera, and maintenance information, discussion of a maintenance agreement between the city and the county, how that would proceed. So it was very informative, and we will meet next on May 28th at 1:30. One more addition, I went to the Montecito Water Board meeting, their first on becoming an official groundwater sustainability agency, part of SIGMA, and I think the Water District will reference that today. Election of officers, and then proceeding with a meeting schedule and a GSP, groundwater sustainability plan. So that's my report. Thank you.
Commissioner Kupiec? I have nothing. And for myself, I have nothing to report. All right, let's proceed next on the agenda to the minutes of our last meeting of April 18. Do any commissioners have any comments, additions, or edits to the minutes of that meeting? If not, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes as submitted.
So
Commissioner Senor.
So move.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded to approve the minutes as submitted. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Okay, minutes are approved. Now we will proceed next to our director's report. Director Palmer, thank you for joining us today, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Is that working? Oh, now it's working. I wanted to welcome our new commissioner, Ron Police. We haven't met yet, but we're happy to have you on the commission. Thank you for volunteering and being a part of this process. I wanted to report a couple of items. One is, and this doesn't necessarily direct Montecito, but it is a countywide issue. Back in April, the Board of Supervisors adopted the hoops ordinance, and that went into effect. And then just this week, we received notification that there's been an appeal on the CEQA aspect of that process. That so the ordinance actually will remain in effect. So we've adopted it. We're going to continue to use it. The CEQA lawsuit will work its way through the process. I think they said maybe 18 months, Brian. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you know, 18 months to 24 months maybe to resolve that, something around that. So we'll know whether we haven't actually read the documentation yet, but I think we feel pretty comfortable that our CEQA process was adequate. So that happened this week. I want to update you on what's going to be happening at the Board of Supervisors. We didn't have any departmental items on the 14th or the 7th of May, and then there was a day where we didn't have, I think it was the end of April, that there was no board meeting on one of the Tuesdays. So what's upcoming for us is on the 21st, we are going to have the accessory dwelling unit item come back to the board. This is the opportunity where they have to review the Coastal Commission's comments on that ordinance, which we have recommended that they accept. They'll accept those. It'll go back to the commission, and then we will have it effective in the coastal zone after the Coastal Commission takes their final action. We have budget hearings on the 25th. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Budget hearings on the 6th, 6/11 and 6/13. So those are the days that we will have the budget hearings. Our budget is pretty well set. We did get an expansion for some consulting money for processing farm stays, which is more or less a broader county issue. And then we also received an approval to hire some 2 additional cannabis planters because we have got a lot of applications that have come in. Those will be part of our budget hearing. We have coming up the appeal on the Patterson Avenue commercial project, and that was in Goleta area. So that'll be heard at the board on I believe the 21st as well. I'm sorry, that's on the 4th. That's on the 4th. And then we have CREF on June 18th.
Just for the public, could you please identify the acronym CREF?
CREF, I
Thank you.
will. It's Coastal Resource Enhancement Fund Awards. So this is a grant program that the county runs. It's oil and gas money, mitigation money. And right now, we're having it every 2 years where we have applicants come in and then we make a decision about whether they meet the standards. So yes, thank you for pointing that out.
All right, any questions? I just have one. Do you have on the horizon at all short-term rentals or any other matter that might affect our Montecito community?
Not on the near term, no.
All right, well, thank you for that report. Let's next move on the agenda to the project status update.
Chair, new members of the commission, at prior hearings, it was asked about those projects that have a requirement to file a report to the Montecito Planning Commission. And as we went over in the projection report earlier today, the Casa Dorinda Open Space Management Plan has been tentatively scheduled for July for receive and file. And the other one was the Miramar Hotel. There are a number of conditions of approval on the Miramar Hotel that require them to receive or require them to submit an update to the Montecito Planning Commission. The one that had come up was the phasing and parking of the beach club membership, phasing and parking, which is a condition of approval. That was scheduled 24 to 36 months from the beginning of operation, which would be anticipated out at summer 2021 or 22. And then there's a number of other conditions of approval that range from the beach bar hours, site parking plan, employee parking, events, and excursion buses, just in summary, and their parking. And those were scheduled out at 12 to 18 months from either final occupancy or beginning of operation. And so those would be anticipated of fall of 2020 before they'd come back to before they come to the Planning Commission for your review. And then I already talked about the Casa Dorinda Open Space Management Plan. So that's our understanding in looking at the projects. I know there was a question about the Westmont, how that condition of approval is linked to construction phases, and if there's no construction, there was no requirement for them to provide a report to the Planning Commission. So that concludes the project status update.
All right, well, thank you for that, and I'm glad we looked into the bowels of the department to come up with some dates and make sure we get those on calendar. So thank you. Next, we'll move to waive public hearing matters.
Yeah, Chair Newman, members of the commission, this is just a noticing item on the agenda that's required to notice that. So there's no action required by the commission on that, so we can move to the consent agenda item.
All right, fine. First moving to the consent agenda, item C1 is flood control acquisition, government code conformity for Park Lane. This is a determination under government code section 65402C. Let me just comment personally that I have some questions about this project, and if other commissioners likewise do or have concerns, we can move this to a hearing either today or at a later meeting, depending on the pleasure of the commissioners. Are there any other thoughts any commissioners have on this topic? Commissioner Senor?
Yes, I would basically move or support placing this on our standard agenda today. I have some questions for Mr. Fry from flood control, and I think that'd probably be the most appropriate way to establish a formal a discussion. Thank you.
Commissioner Kupiak, any thoughts?
I agree. This is worthy of review at our standard agenda.
Commissioner Pucci?
I agree also.
All right, fine.
So Chair, new members of the commission, we can pull this item off the consent and add it to the standard agenda, and David Villalobos can go ahead and read it in the record if the commission would like to. Just as a matter of record, planning staff is here today, as well as John Fry from Flood Control to answer the questions, so we could move into that action, or that item now if the commission would like to do that.
All right, I think that'll work. So why don't we then proceed with the flood control acquisition agenda item now being moved to the standard agenda. And we have both staff from flood control and our department with us today. So if you'd come forward, please, we'd appreciate the opportunity to visit about this project. Good morning, Mr. Fry.
Good morning, Montecito Planning Commission. I'm John Fry. I'm the engineering manager with the Flood Control District, and I'll try to answer any questions you might have about this acquisition. 65402 determination, I should say.
Understood. And so, commissioners, questions? Commissioner Kupiak, your light is on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. First, let's go to any disclosures with respect to this project. Any commissioners visit the site or otherwise? Commissioner Senauer.
Yes, I visited the site yesterday. It's very difficult to see because there's construction right just south of it, a rebuild. But I know the property and that we've hiked along it on West Park Lane where the public trail goes. And so I can reference mentally where it was, and I'm sure it's as John would verify, it's vacant at this time. Thank you.
That is correct.
Any other commissioners? Commissioner Pulice?
I'm familiar with the property as well, over the years walking as well.
And for myself, yesterday I too did a windshield inspection of the property, drove up there and saw the site as well as the construction activity. All right. Well, let's proceed then to questions or any concerns any commissioners have about this project. Commissioner Kupiak, did you have your light on?
I am assuming that I'm reading this right, so this parcel will be donated to the county by the property owner.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Senauer?
How long of a process is that in general when they offer a donation to when it is finalized? In other words, it remains, the parcel remains as it is now. It's been demoed, it's just land. And what is the process and the pathway? And do you anticipate sort of a resolution to this? And what will be done with the property then the county will inherit?
Commissioner Senauer, the typical process is when the county acquires or even quick claims, for example. I was here a week or two ago, actually to the Planning Commission, not the Montecito Planning Commission. But anytime there is an acquisition or a release, we have to go through this process, starting with the 65402. Then eventually it'll go to the board, and they'll authorize or not the acquisition. And so that typical county process is, on the order of 2 or 3 months. And assuming that there's no opposition or anything to try to stall that, it should be fairly smooth sailing. I don't know if this donation has already been agendized for the board. If it hasn't yet, that could itself take 6-8 weeks from this point. As far as the status of the property itself, this isn't really anything that the flood control district sought. It's purely in its most basic terms, the desires of the property owners to not want anyone to live here in the future because it is in a high hazard area. And flood control was the logical receiver of that donation. It happens to butt up right next to our property on the San Montecito debris basin, and so made sense. Our plans for it are pretty simple. During operations, when we are cleaning out, which are very infrequent, except for the past 18 months, I guess, we could possibly use it as an area to allow trucks to turn around, maybe stage. As you know, the roadway itself is very narrow. It's almost a single truck in, single truck out. So that's about the gist of what our plans are.
Commissioner Center.
Thank you. One more question. What do you anticipate when it's not being used, say, for staging, et cetera? Any protective fencing where the public is not permitted to wander, or if the path, once again, will be used? Can the public access that, or will it be fenced off, et cetera, et cetera?
We have no plans to fence off, and in fact, I just learned that I believe there's an easement to the Montecito Trails Foundation that crosses that property. We know that there's hikers that go back and forth. And similar to our debris basin property, you'll see the same thing there. We don't have it fenced off in any way, shape, or form. Now, the only thing I might put out there is that if trespassing occurs to the point where people start dumping stuff, and that's actually occurred on the flood control debris basin parcel, then we start thinking, okay, how can we get around that? We've never gone as far as to fence off the flood control property, but we'll consider the donated parcel in the same terms as we've considered our debris basin parcel.
Thank you. One more question. Has flood control received any other requests for acquisition or basically donation as this, flood control specifically?
In hand, no. Over the past 12, 14 months, I've heard many property owners exploring their options and thinking, well, maybe that's what we could do. But this is the one and only in hand.
All right. Commissioner Police?
I have really no questions. I think you asked most of the good ones anyway. All right, thank you.
I have one more question.
Commissioner Kupiec?
I mean, I'd always assumed that this was a small piece of a larger puzzle to do a debris basin. And, I mean, I realize that this is I'm not sure how a 0.59 acre piece fits into this entire matrix. I realize it's being donated. How does the property get valuated in terms of the donation?
As far as I know, I don't know that there is a value that we have appraised in accepting the donation. This is a donation, and so there's not going to be an expenditure of public funds to acquire it. So I'm not aware that any value, at least on the county side, has been placed on that property.
Well, it probably does on a federal and state level in terms of, what does the property get evaluated at? Because it's clearly going to be a tax write-off for somebody.
I would think so too, and
So are we
that's in the
accepting $1
hands of the
million
private
gift, a
property
$10
owners that are
million
donating
gift?
it.
Just, if I may, inform both the commission and public, our role here in this process is kind of limited to two questions, and only two under 65402. And that is, one, is there a governmental purpose that is served here? And second of all, is this parcel and its acquisition consistent with our community plan?
And it may or may not be.
It may or may not be, that's right. For myself, Mr. Fry, appreciate your comments. I'm unsure about what purpose this governmental purpose the acquisition of this property really serves from a flood control perspective. Will the acquisition of this property by your department in any way enhance the flood control of our county and of this site in particular, and its functioning as a flood control basin?
Chair Newman, I think the fact that it's being offered as a donation and the fact that we're proposing to accept it, as I said, the roads are so narrow up there that it could serve a real benefit to allow trucks to back in, turn around, and try to facilitate our operations up there. It takes longer to clean that basin out because of how hard the access is up there. So this will ultimately benefit. I don't believe that at this time the parcel itself would lend itself to an expansion of the basin. So that's not on the table. If that's something that was of concern, it's really a benign transfer of property.
And are there any plans for the maintenance of the property in any way? So as an example, you mentioned that it might be useful as a turnaround. How will that turnaround capability be maintained or respected 10, 20 years from now?
Well, it'll be maintained in the same manner that the property at the debris basin is maintained. And just for your information, the flood control property at the debris basin actually extends I almost want to say a couple hundred feet downstream of the embankment. So if you've been up there and you've seen where that embankment is, just picture that the flood control property extends further downstream than that. And, I would say that if you went up there on any day, you'd see that it's maintained in fairly good order.
And one last thing, based on my site visit yesterday, I noticed that there is a turnaround up further on the road that does not appear to be part of this parcel. Is that turnaround and usage being facilitated by the county or for the county in any way?
Oh, Commissioner Newman, I'm not familiar with that turnaround, and I offhand wouldn't know if the turnaround is on flood control property. If it is, then we will use it. If it's not, then we don't. We wouldn't use it if it's not on public access right away.
Okay, it's basically to the north of the parcel.
Of the donation parcel?
Yes.
Well, the flood control property is immediately northerly of the donation parcel, so it may be that this turnaround is on flood control property.
Okay, thank you. Council?
Chair Newman and Commissioners, I would just like to clarify for the Commission, just so that you have the exact language. The Commission is being asked to report on whether the location, purpose, and extent of the proposed acquisition whether it conforms with the adopted general plan, including applicable provisions of the Montecito Community Plan. And as noted in the staff report, the proposed use is for limited use for parking and truck turnaround to support flood district operations at the San Isidro debris basin. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, any more questions
I have
from
one-
commissioners?
Thank you, Chair. I have one last question, John. When the transfer, prior to a transfer or acceptance of the donation, the county does obviously, or you due diligence as to if there's been any contamination, et cetera, and who would be liable to remediate that if in fact you found something existed? With the debris basin, there was, and the flow, et cetera, there was a lot of toxic material. And where is it incumbent to deal with that? Is it the county or the parcel owner prior to donation?
Commissioner Senauer, that may be a question that I'll seek assistance from County Council on. I believe that the acquisition goes through the typical escrow process where it's like a holding period where those sorts of issues are sorted out and identified. We're working through the general services, real property services on that, and I would think that that sort of issue would sort itself out in that process.
All right, thank you, Mr. Fry. If there are no further questions from commissioners, I should have called on, and we will now invite public comment. I don't see any speaker slips, but would like to ask if there are any members of the public who are present today who would like to speak to this topic, please come forward. All right, seeing none, we'll then close public comment and the public portion of the hearing. If there are no more further questions or whatnot from the commission, let's discuss the project amongst ourselves, and we'll see if there's any consensus emerging here. Any comments from commissioners or thoughts about this you'd like to share? Commissioner Senar?
Thank you, Chair. I see this as a public good and a donation that will serve the public in a very positive way. So I am supportive, and I think due diligence all around will be will be done. And I think my review basically would be supportive. Thank you.
Commissioner Puliche?
Yes, I concur. I think that anytime you can pick up a little bit of property might take some relief off the neighbors if their trucks are parked close to their house, and maybe a way of avoiding that. So I'm in favor of this acquisition.
Commissioner Kupiak, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think just having a turnaround on Randall Road would be a good thing. So, I think it's consistent with the community plan, and I would be supportive of this.
Okay. All right, then the chair will entertain a motion to proceed by way of approval of the acquisition and the criteria specified under 65402C have been met.
So Chair Newman, members of the Commission, sorry to interrupt. Just to clarify, the recommendation from the Planning Commission, the action, is listed in the memo to the Planning Commission. I recommend that the motion include those recommendations. So the action today is just to determine that the proposed acquisition is in conformity with the comprehensive plan, including the Montecito Community Plan. So the action today is not whether to approve the acquisition or not. It's really a report on whether it conforms to the community plan. So I'd recommend to whoever's making the motion to follow the recommendations that's listed in the memo to the Planning Commission.
All right, thank you for that specificity. Is there such a motion? Commissioner Senar?
I so move that we basically adopt the recommendations that are in 2.0 and include 1, 2, and 3 on page 2 of the staff report. Thank you.
Is there a second to the motion?
I second the motion.
All right. All right, any further discussion? None. All right, all in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, carries unanimously.
Excuse me. I have to take that back. I apologize. I was on the wrong page. All right. So do we, Jeff, can you refer to, I'm sorry, I take full responsibility for being 2 pages off.
So, yeah, Chair Newman.
Recommendation, I see it.
Yeah, Chair Newman, members of the Commission, I think the hearing's really fast because we already made a motion on the other project. Just kidding.
All right. Okay. So let me amend.
It would be just to be helpful. It would be page 3.
Correct.
Of the
Thank you.
memo that's dated May 15th. So
Thank-
those recommendations.
Thank you very much. I so amend and apologize. Thank you.
Council, what's your advice? Do we need to reconsider? And
Chair Newman and Commissioners, I would just recommend that the Commission vote on the amended motion.
okay. So I think what we need to actually do is move to reconsider first, and Chair will entertain a motion to reconsider the motion that was just passed.
I so move.
All right, so moved.
Second.
All right, been moved and seconded to reconsider the motion was passed. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All right. Do we have a motion to make with respect to this agenda item? Commissioner Senar, you want to take a second stab at it?
I recommend that we adopt the staff recommendation on page 3 of the staff report, and that includes 1 and 2. Is that correct? Thank you very much.
All right, it's been moved that the Staff report recommendations, item 1 and 2, be adopted. Is there a second?
I second that motion.
Seconded by Commissioner Kupiec. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, all opposed. Thank you, Mr. Fry and others for answering our questions today. All right, moving on to our standard agenda, item 2, formerly item 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. The following is a hearing on the request of Eric and Diane Ozolins, owners, to consider case numbers 19 VAR 1 and 19 CDH 14, applications filed on March 26, 2019. And to determine that the project is exempt from environmental review pursuant to section 15302 of the state guidelines for the implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act.
All right, thank you. We're ready to proceed, and we'll start first with a staff report, please. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Welcome, Commissioner Police. I will now be presenting the proposal for the Ozolins dwelling variance. I am Ray Harmon, the project planner for this case. This is an aerial view of the proposed project site. The location can be seen marked by the yellow star on this map. The property is located in the coastal zone on Posilipo Lane in the 1E1 zone district. It is south of Highway 101, shown here in this white dashed line, on the corner of South Jamison Lane and Posilipo Lane, shown here in red. The railroad tracks and Fernald Point Lane are located south of the property, and the most prominent neighbors are a large apartment complex and the Rosewood Miramar Hotel west along South Jamison. This is a site plan of the subject property. The property includes an existing 3,248 square foot dwelling, shown here in yellow, and an existing 672 square feet detached garage, shown here in purple. Both of these structures were damaged during the January 9, 2008 debris flow. Shown here is a photo of the western facade of the dwelling, along with a photo of the northern facade of the detached garage. The applicant proposes to elevate the existing dwelling, which I will describe in the next slide, and to demolish and rebuild the existing detached garage. As it currently exists, the dwelling is considered legal nonconforming as to height, since the dwelling was constructed in 1912, moved to its current location in 1954. The height limit for a dwelling in the coastal zone is 25 feet, and the existing dwelling is approximately 30 feet tall. Per FEMA and county flood control requirements, the applicant proposes to raise the structure to a total ridgeline height of 33.5 feet, a difference of 3.5 feet from existing. The variance is being requested to elevate the house to comply with county flood control and FEMA requirements, which would cause the dwelling to further exceed the 25-foot height limit. So shown here is the west facade of the dwelling. The original finished floor before the January 9 debris flow is shown here as the purple line, and the new FEMA and county flood control required finished floor is depicted here as the dashed blue line. The original finished grade before the debris flow is shown here as this orange line, and the proposed finished grade is shown here as the dashed green yellow line. The proposed finished grade, an increase of 1.5 feet from existing finished grade, would be achieved by using existing material on site that was deposited during the debris flow. This dwelling was constructed in 1912 by architect Arthur Burnett Benton. He was an architect who designed numerous important buildings during his career in California. In Santa Barbara specifically, to give you an idea, he designed the second Arlington Hotel, which is where the Arlington Theater is now located. So this house on Posilipo Lane qualifies as historically significant because only 2 buildings in Santa Barbara, in the Santa Barbara area, were known to have been designed in the chalet style by this architect. This house and the Santa Barbara Country Club house. And of the 2, only this structure survives. This structure has been noted as one of Benton's finest houses. For these reasons, the structure is historically significant. In order to maintain the historical integrity of the dwelling and to comply with FEMA and county flood control requirements, the applicant is requesting this variance for the dwelling to be elevated the required 3.5 feet, and the existing detached garage to be demolished and reconstructed is not considered historically significant. The 3.5-foot height increase of the dwelling would result in the need to add additional stairs to the eastern facade of the structure. So the red rectangle on this slide shows the location of the stairs and points to a photo of the existing stairs. And other than the addition of these 3 stairs, there would be no changes to the exterior appearance of the dwelling. The square footage would not be changed, and the elevated structure would remain in its current footprint. The project would be consistent with the comprehensive plan, including the coastal land use plan and the Montecito community plan. Approval of the variance would be consistent with the purpose and intent of the E1 zone district, since the variance is necessary to allow the existing single-family dwelling to remain on this residentially zoned property. With approval of this variance and associated coastal development permit, the proposed project would allow the height of the structure to further exceed the 25-foot height limit to vary from the standard E1 zone district requirements. The project would comply with all other applicable requirements of the coastal zoning ordinance. With regard to environmental review, CEQA guideline section 15302 exempts the replacement or reconstruction of existing structures where the new structure will be located on the same site and will have substantially the same purpose. Additionally, CEQA guideline section 15304 exempts minor alterations to land which do not involve the removal of healthy, mature scenic trees, and this proposal does not include the removal of any of the trees on the property. There are a few revisions to the conditions of approval that staff would like to make. So these changes are just a bit of the language in attachment B2 of the staff report. So these are the CDH conditions. So for condition number 3, with regard to dust control, which would require that the applicant waters down the site to prevent dust from leaving the site, we added the sentence, "When reasonably available, recycled water should be used." And for condition number 8, regarding the restoration of the historically significant dwelling, the second sentence currently reads in the staff report, "There shall be no other changes to the material, style, workmanship, design, or orientation of the dwelling." We omitted the word "other" so that it now reads, "There shall be no changes to the material, style, workmanship, design, orientation of the dwelling." Staff recommends that your commission make the required findings for approval of the project as specified in attachment A of the staff report, including CEQA findings. Determine the project exempt from CEQA pursuant to guideline sections 15302 and 15304 as specified in attachment C, the notice of exemption. and approve the project case numbers 19 VAR 1 and 19 CDH 14, subject to the conditions of approval included as attachments B1 and B2 as revised during this presentation.
All right, that concludes the staff presentation. Thank you, and I just want to comment favorably. The lines and that bit of animation is a visual aid to us and explained well what we have before us. So we'll now proceed to questions from commissioners with respect to the staff report. Any questions from commissioners? Oh, that's right, excuse me. First, any disclosures of ex parte visits to the site? Commissioner Senor.
Yes, I visited the site yesterday with the owner, and I did a walk around and a walk through on the first floor to get sort of a perspective of three-dimensional is always helpful. I also saw the property in 2011 or 12 when it was for sale, and it is a wonderful property, and it just didn't work out. But I'm certainly glad it has a good steward now. So thank you.
Other disclosures?
Yes, I also
Commissioner Boliche?
made a visit to the site, met the owner, one of the owners, and I walked around, took a view from the closest streets and got a perspective of its view from what it might look like, obstructing the view of the mountains, if any. So I did that Saturday.
Commissioner Kupiec?
I have visited that property some 5 years ago, probably during that same time, so I'm familiar with the site and the building.
And for myself, I did have a site visit last Friday, met the owner of the property and toured the site as well. All right, thank you all for that. Now we'll go to questions with respect to the staff report from commissioners, please. Any questions at all? All right, no questions. Let's then, we'll call upon the applicant to present to us. And I will add, for purposes of the record, the applicant did submit a multi-page letter last Friday, the 13th, which unfortunately did not come in within the usual deadline. If it's the pleasure of the commission, we can have a motion to add that, and perhaps at the same time a letter dated May 14th to the record for our consideration, if that's your desire.
I would so move that document be added to the file.
Which document are you referring to?
The letter.
The letter of May 13th from the owner, all right. Is there a second to the motion?
I second, yes.
All right, all in favor of adding the May 13th letter from the owner to the record, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. All right, we'll now hear from the owner and the applicant. If you'll come to the podium, place the microphone so you can be heard and identify yourself for the record, that would be appreciated. And also if you could give us an estimate of how much time you'd like to be heard. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Eric Oslins. My wife and I own the home in question here. I hope to take 5 to 6 minutes of your time. My wife also would like to share a few thoughts after I've had a chance to speak. Good morning, Chairman Newman and commissioners of the Montecito Planning Commission. I'd like to speak to you rather than read, but there's a lot in my mind and I'm fearful I could lose track and take extra time, so I'm going to generally read to you. First, I'd like to say that I appreciate you adding the letter that we prepared a couple of days ago. I'm sorry we were unaware of the deadline, so we provided it late. It's important to us to get documents in the public record, and part of that reason is, besides your consideration here today, we know that we're subject to both public appeal and appeal from the California Coastal Commission. It's important to us to make sure that the Coastal Commission understands that the issues they would also be considered and have been considered here at this meeting. If, in fact, you're able to make an approval, we want to make sure that they know there's not issues undiscovered, unconsidered that would cause them to put us through an appeals process, which could be sort of financially devastating and difficult for us. So that's why we're so diligent to make sure we have things in the record. So I expect you've had a chance to review the staff report, and I hope you've had a good understanding of our circumstances and are able to move forward with their recommendations. Over the next few minutes, I hope to articulate the primary reasons that I believe it's appropriate and perhaps really the only reasonable outcome for you to grant the requested variance. First, please keep in mind that we're not developers trying to build something new or significantly modify a home in our community. We're also not here to ask for special treatment as victims that excuse me, I didn't think I was going to do that. Anyhow, we don't intend to ask for special treatment as victims of the debris flow. We do understand we're quite fortunate to have our health, and we often think of those who are not as fortunate as us that morning. We're not accustomed to or comfortable asking for special treatment. That said, we do want to point out that we understand the county has tried to streamline the repair process for those impacted by this event through the like-for-like rebuilding ordinance, but due to some jurisdictional issues I don't fully understand, those efforts do not impact or help us. If it were up to us, we'd simply be repairing our home at this point. Instead, we find ourselves stuck between a rock, the FEMA and county flood control requirements, and a hard place, the height limitations within the coastal zone. If we saw a path for modifying the FEMA requirements, we'd be pursuing that path, but we've been advised that's not available. On the surface, it seems there's a conflict between the requirement to elevate the finished floor of our home and the inability to increase the height of the building. However, after careful consideration of the purposes behind each policy, we have come to understand that is not necessarily the case. The request for a variance process is in place precisely because those who developed the land entitlement process understood that in spite of their best efforts to craft consistent and uniform policy across the board, real world circumstances can and will arise from time to time that require careful consideration and thoughtful individuals to make a judgment on the specific circumstances. Hence the process to request and your power to grant a variance. As I understand it, the important thing in a variance is to consider the underlying purposes of the seemingly conflicting policies. I think there are two. On the FEMA and Santa Barbara County flood control requirements, it seems the primary objective there is to promote the health and safety in areas known to be subject to flooding. While the January 9th debris flow is unusual for our generation here in Santa Barbara, FEMA has seen a lot of floods. Fundamentally, they know if the home were higher, it would be safer now and in the future. The property would be more resilient and thereby reduce the economic cost to private parties and public entities far into the future. Number two, height limitations within the coastal zone. It seems the purpose of these policies is to ensure that views from the public areas near the coast are not lost or damaged by development that benefits only a small subset of the population. I value both of these purposes. Fortunately, I don't think there's a circumstance in which only one objective can be met in this case. We hope we have provided sufficient detail to demonstrate that granting the variance to meet the FEMA requirement will achieve all of the objectives of that policy without having any negative detrimental impact on public views. Because of the existing Caltrans wall to the north of our property, mature vegetation in other homes, and the topography of the area, it is already not possible to see the ocean from any public space north of our home, other than that when you're in the mountains. This would be true whether our home was there or not, and whether our home is elevated or not. There is no negative impact on the public looking from the north to the south by allowing this requested variance. Furthermore, as also shown in the photographs that we've provided, the current height, with or without the elevation that's required, at the current height, with or without the elevation, it is not possible to even see our home from the beach. So no public view corridor from the public beach toward the mountains will be impacted in any way by the elevation of our home. In simple terms, our home is not visible because of other homes and mature vegetation. While it is possible to see our home from the middle of Fernald Point Lane while looking north, that is not a public gathering space by any stretch. There are no sidewalks, walking paths, or other pedestrian space here. One would have to stand in the middle of a public road and really on the railroad tracks to see this view. And for clarity, even from this non-public viewing space, the required elevation has virtually no impact on the mountain views. Finally, I hope you've had a chance to review the historical report prepared by Shelley Bookspan. As we have known since before we bought this home, it is quite special. We consider ourselves fortunate to own it. I won't pretend to speak for others in the community, but I will share with you some of the feedback I've heard from our neighbors. Very soon after buying the home, we decided to cut down some old and diseased 14-foot-high hedges that surrounded the south and west portion of the property. This exposed the home to our neighbors for the first time in decades. Over the following couple of months, as I was out gardening, neighbors would stop their cars to say things like, "Thank you. It's so nice to now see that beautiful home." And wow, it looks great. Views of the mountains are great, and they will be preserved and not damaged by the requested elevation to our home. But in this case, a well-designed 100-year-old home is itself something wonderful to see. Please give us a chance to repair and care for it. We appreciate your consideration of these circumstances and request you respect the health and safety policies objectives of the FEMA and Santa Barbara Flood Control Policy, while considering that doing so will not, in fact, in this particular case, have a negative impact on public views. We have a lot of work ahead of us. Please help us get started. And I think my wife would like to say something as well. Thank you. And we're here for
Thank you.
questions if you have any.
Yes, please, come forward.
Good morning. Thank
Good
you.
morning.
I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I'm one of those many people who have a social phobia around speaking. As much as everything that I've written did come from my heart, I am just going to read to you because I can also wander off track.
That's fine. If you just make sure, please, to speak into the microphone, that'd be
Yes,
helpful.
of course. I'm sorry. I'm
Thank you.
Diane Oslins, one of the owners of the home. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to speak today. I really do feel like the planning and development staff and the architectural historian, the information Eric and I provided in the letter that we gave to you, and what Eric has already said, really speak to the procedural and practical reasons that we're here. And with all of these facts and maps and interpretations of codes and articles, which we've been swimming around in our heads for months now, and I respect are really what you guys need to consider in making your decision today. I can't set aside the personal feelings and the impacts that this process has stirred and that your decision will have. And that's what I want to speak to today. And thinking about how to speak to you today and why your decision matters a great deal to me personally, I ended up reflecting on something I learned after marrying into Eric's family. I've enjoyed several decades now of learning about Latvian history and culture. And in Latvia, there's a term called the Mājasmāt, which means mother of the house. The Mājasmāt not only takes care of the home and family in a practical sense, but she sets the tone and expectations of the home for family, friends, and visitors. It is a wonderful, old world, matriarchal idea and a big responsibility that I have embraced and enjoyed. I understand that for your purposes, the house at 1637 Posilipo is a structure. But for me, it is my home and my responsibility. Before our children were born, Eric and I lived in Summerlin, and we worked in Santa Barbara. And my daily drive took me past this house. Even then, I loved seeing glimpses of it from the freeway, partly because it told me I was just one exit away from being in Summerlin, and partly because I had this curiosity as to who in the world would live in a place sandwiched between the freeway and the railroad tracks. And mostly because it clearly was very old, and therefore I imagined it had a story. How such a beautiful old home came to be situated in that place was strange to me, but I always loved that it was there. And the first time I set foot inside that house, I think about the same time that you did, my curiosity was satisfied. I felt transported to a different era, while also feeling that the architecture was timeless. The freeway melted away, and the passing trains only seemed to add a sense of romance. I knew this house needed stewards to care for it during our stay here, and that just as it had a history before us, if well cared for, it would have many stories to tell well after we are gone. I felt so lucky that Eric felt the same, and so shortly after that day, it stopped being a house, and it became our home. As the Mājasmāt, I wanted this home to not only be a place of love for us and our family, but for our friends as well. In the years we have had the honor of living there, we have hosted 3 weddings for dear friends, celebrated many significant birthdays, hosted Thanksgiving dinners, danced in our living room through many New Year's Eves, watched our children laughing with friends while warming up in the jacuzzi after spending hours at the beach. During several natural disasters, including the Thomas Fire, our home has also been a place of refuge for those evacuated or in need. Every room in that house and corner of that yard holds memories of love and laughter and friendship. I don't consider myself materialistic before the mudslide or even more afterward. I'm aware that the lives of my family are more important than any one thing, including the house. And I am grateful that we came out of that event alive and physically unharmed. I also realize that I have these memories whether the house exists or not. Had the house been completely destroyed, as so many were, we would have been extremely sad, I'm sure, but certainly focused on the gratitude that we have each other. Once we realized the devastation that occurred in our community, we were all the more grateful for our safety, and we came to realize how lucky we are that though the house is damaged, there is nothing wrong that can't be fixed. This is an opportunity to be exactly the stewards I had hoped we would be. Not only can we restore the structure, we have an opportunity to protect it from possible similar future events. We can't fill this responsibility without your help. As the Miasma, I'm asking for your help in restoring this place that, as I've tried here to describe, has become more than a house, not only to us, but to our extended family and friends as well. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for your comments. All right, at this time, we'll invite the general public to speak to this matter. I have one speaker slip and would ask that Paul Madston come to the podium to be recognized. And while you're making your way here, let me just add to, we did receive a written comment from the public with respect to the project signed by Mr. Wicks on behalf of the Montecito Estates Homeowners Association. It too was received after the usual deadline, so if there's a motion to add this to the record, the chair would shall entertain it.
So, Mr. Chair, that provision in your bylaws is typically reserved for letters longer than a page in length. So I don't think that there's any need to incorporate it in part of the record by vote.
It is part of the record.
It is part of the record.
All right, thank you for that correction then. All right, sir, please identify yourself and tell us what you have to say.
Good morning. My name is Paul Madsen. I own the property directly across the street at 1635. And I've lived on that property for 65 years. And I remember that house years and years and years ago when the first owner, after they moved it in on that property. And I want the board to approve this variance so that they can get back in their home. And I don't see any alterations or anything on the house. I would love to see it back in its state. And I'm just briefly saying my support for this. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for your comment and for coming today. Are there any other members of the public who would like to be heard on this matter? If so, would you come forward? All right, seeing none, then we'll close the public portion of the hearing. And are there any questions or comments from commissioners at this time? All right.
I have a comment.
All right, Commissioner Kupiak.
Thank you for coming today and telling your story. I, too, live in a 120-year-old house in Montecito. And I think that the operative word for many of us who own properties like that is stewardship. Mm-hmm. There have been many families who've lived in my house before me, and there'll be many after me. And I think the idea of preserving those properties of historic significance to our community is of vital importance. And I want to applaud you as the homeowners for making your best effort to try to maintain this historic property so that it lives on long beyond any of us. So, you know, to coin a phrase, I mean, you had me at hello. You know, I think this is the type of project, in order to be on the record for even Coastal Commission review, I mean, properties like this have to be preserved. Otherwise, we lose our sense of history. And if we need to amend the laws or grant variances that allow us to do these things, and it seems to me that the proposal that you're making is well within the consistent realm of how that house can be preserved and salvaged. And I would like nothing more than for you to get back in your house as fast as you can. I have no other comments.
Commissioner Senor?
I concur with every word of Commissioner Kupiak's statement. I find that the stewardship basically evokes something that is almost intangible. It's the spirit of a community. It evokes the spirit of the house, and that you guard it so closely. It really supports the public good in a greater way. I grew up in a house that was built in 1912 in the Midwest, architect built as yours was, and we revered it. It was significant in our lives for all the reasons you pointed out. And this community and this state and this nation, it references what you are doing to maintain and honor this house. I think the variance is well within the conformity standards that are required, and you are honoring the house by basically continuing with its architectural integrity. So thank you very much for coming forward, and appreciated your heartfelt narrative. Thank you.
Commissioner Police?
You mentioned in your comments that time's of essence for you to get going. Is there anything obstructing, from a public perspective, you being able to progress your project, or am I to assume that everything's on course to get it started before the end of the year?
If you could come forward and to the microphone and address that, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm certainly not an expert in the public process. We're learning a lot recently. My understanding is, with respect to discretionary review, the only thing that would stand in front of us at this point is a possible appeal from a neighbor or a community member, or more concerningly, the California Coastal Commission. And I say more concerningly because I believe that's a long, slow, expensive process to go through. Other than that, we'd be in for plans, into plan check for the foundation modifications that are necessary.
I guess I was curious about your 2-year time frame as far as getting this going. Is that, can you get an extension, or if you fall short?
I don't think an extension would be necessary unless the California Coastal Commission files an appeal. And if that's the case, we would certainly request an extension. I believe there's an administrative process to allow for one extension. I would be hopeful, in the event that there was a Coastal Commission appeal, that we could obtain that extension. I would hate for this building to lose its existing entitlements.
Okay, good luck.
Thank you.
All right, if there are no more comments from commissioners, the chair will entertain a motion. It seems the consensus informally is to approve the project, so I believe the appropriate motion would be to approve the staff report, including Attachment A, the findings of approval. Attachment B, the conditions of approval, and Attachment C, the CEQA exemptions.
Chair Newman, members of the commission, in the staff's presentation, they did indicate some potential revisions to those conditions that were in the original staff report. So if the commission would like, we have those revised recommendations on the screen for you to consider.
Is there a motion then to adopt the recommendations 1 through 3 on the screen and the amendments noted in the report today?
I would be pleased to make this motion.
All right, moved. Is there a second?
I'll say it.
All right, any discussion? All right, ready to vote? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. I want to say to you as applicants that we recognize and appreciate and empathize with the emotional, financial, and personal burden that you've endured here. as a result of the impact of the Thomas fire and debris flow on your family and your home. And I don't want it to go unnoticed that we appreciate as well the understanding you've had with respect to the details and the process, your attention to that, your patience, your perseverance. And we want to thank you for all of that and say that you've served your family and your home well, and I think you're an example to our community. So we thank you. All right. Next agenda item. We'll take a 5-minute break while folks are setting up, and we'll move then to the Thomas Fire Resilience Report, standard agenda item 3, in just 5 minutes. So we'll take a brief recess and then resume. All right, we're ready to reconvene the hearing of May 15th of the Montecito Planning Commission and proceed to our standard agenda item that is next before us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Montecito Planning Commission will receive a report from the Montecito Sanitary District and the Montecito Water District regarding their efforts following the Thomas Fire and January debris flow to make Montecito and their organizations more resilient.
All right, thank you. We're here today on this agenda item, and by invitation, we requested representatives of our two special districts to come today, and we're very appreciative that Diane Gabriel, the general manager and district engineer, is here from the Montecito Sanitary District, and Nick Turner, the general manager of the Water District, has joined us. There are two macro questions important to our community that I think have emerged since the Thomas fire and debris flow, and they are: first, what damage occurred with respect to these respective special districts as a result of Thomas, and has that damage been repaired? And secondly, is the infrastructure of each respective district more resilient now and better able to withstand, heaven forbid, a like disaster in the future? So to present on those two questions and any other developments with respect to their districts that are relevant, we've invited and appreciate the special district representatives coming, and we're going to next hear from who is going to go first. Did you decide amongst yourselves? All right. All right.
So, Chair Newman, members of the commission, I think the way we had it ordered doesn't really matter, but we could go with the Water District first, if that's okay, and then we can transfer over to the Montecito Sanitary District. Or we can flip for a coin, either one, but.
All right. Please. All right, Mr. Turner.
Yes, Chairman Newman, Commissioners, Nick Turner, General Manager of the Montecito Water District. First, thank you for inviting me here to talk about our resiliency following the Thomas Fire and the subsequent debris flow. First, resilience, or resilient, defined as the ability to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. And for the Montecito Water District, that means providing uninterrupted supply of safe, clean water despite adverse conditions resulting from events such as natural disasters, drought, and earthquakes. And I think you'll see from my presentation that we were resilient prior to the disaster, and we continue to improve upon that as well. An overview of our damages incurred as a result of the Thomas Fire. Our Parkland Reservoir, which is a 1.2 million gallon reservoir located in the upper part of our service territory, caught fire. It caught fire because the roof is made of wood. It caught fire around the edges, and the fire district was able to get that put out, but unfortunately a portion of the roof burned, and the fire suppressant made it into the reservoir, and so the reservoir was isolated and was taken offline. The Jamison Lake watershed, which is in the upper portion of the San Ynez River, the watershed feeds Jamison Lake. It encompasses about 10,000 acres. That entire watershed burned, which resulted, since the fire, in runoff that contained contaminants that impacted our water quality and our ability to treat that water. At Jamison Lake, downstream of Huncal Dam, is what we call the compound, which consists of a number of structures: the cabin, the guest house, a garage, and 3 auxiliary structures. All these structures were built nearly 100 years ago. They were all made of wood. They survived 100 years with various fires throughout that period of time. Unfortunately, all of those structures, including the cabin, which is pictured there, encountered significant damage or complete destruction. We also divert water from Alder Creek into Jamison Lake. That flume, Alder Creek flume, is approximately 1,300 feet long. 800 feet of that was burned in the Thomas Fire, so about 62% of it was destroyed. We are currently not delivering water from Alder Creek until those repairs are complete. And then about a month later, on January 9th, the debris flow occurred. We encountered 8 breaks in our Highline transmission main, which is a main transmission main that exists along the upper part of our service territory. It basically connects the east to the west end. Those breaks took place along major creek crossings. Some of those crossings were suspended and some were buried. In both cases, they were taken out by the debris and mud that scoured through those creeks. Total of about 700 feet of pipe was destroyed. On the backside of the San Ynez Mountains is the pipeline that transfers water from Jamison Lake to our side of the mountain in 2 locations, totaling 240 feet. There were debris flows similar as to what we experienced on this side that took out our pipeline and were required to be repaired. We experienced 15 breaks in our distribution pipe. These are primarily located along bridges. In many cases, the pipe was suspended under the bridge, or it was suspended on the upstream side of the bridge. And in nearly every case, the pipe was destroyed by various boulders and whatnot that took the pipe out. We also had 25 fire hydrants sheared off. That one there survived, but in many cases they did not. And so those required repairs. A key and very difficult aspect of the damages in the emergency were actually locating the various water services, customer water service features that were destroyed as a result of the mud flow. Those are meters that were taken out. They are backflow devices. Any infrastructure that extended above the surface was likely destroyed, leaving those as leaks. As we were trying to seal the system, we had leaks like this everywhere. We also have 52 pressure regulating stations located at various locations throughout the district that help control pressures in our various zones. Those are below ground, and during the mud flow were filled with mud and needed to be cleaned so they could operate properly, and so that we could confirm the fact that they were functioning properly. The recovery process, we did not do it alone. Our response team consisted of all 28 district employees. We also had approximately 120 personnel from various mutual aid agencies and contractors. Together with those individuals, the group did an absolute incredible job taking a system that was destroyed in many aspects and putting it back together and restoring water service in just about 3 weeks. The total cost of our damage currently is right about $9 million. We were able to pay for the majority of that through the use of our reserves. We also received cash advances from both FEMA and our insurance carrier, which is Aqua JPIA. We do anticipate receiving or recovering about 95% of those costs through both of those entities. And we are nearing completion of the major pipeline repairs. It's important to note that these repairs are not simple repairs. They require geotechnical studies, CEQA review, permitting has been a huge hurdle that we've had to deal with, full engineering design, competitive bidding, and construction. All of those are required through FEMA, and there's a very distinct process that we have to follow in order to qualify for reimbursement, and all of that takes time. So we're expecting to have the major pipeline repairs completed by about August. So, as you can see from the amount of damage that we had and our success in getting the system back online in 3 weeks, we were extremely resilient. But I think in most cases, there's always room for improvement. And as we've rebuilt, we've considered ways to improve our resiliency. At our creek crossings, up on our High Line, this one here in the picture being San Isidro Creek, rather than suspending the pipe, which becomes an aesthetics issue, or if it's too low, it could be impacted by debris flow. We've opted to bury these pipes, and not just bury them in soil, but we're digging down to bedrock, and 10 foot below the top of the bedrock, we're using reinforced concrete, and basically making our pipe a part of the bedrock. So we're fairly optimistic that going forward, that any future debris flow will not impact these crossings. In one of the cases, we've opted to not put the pipe in the creek at all. Rather than suspending it or burying it, we've opted to take it along Bella Vista Drive, which completely takes it out of harm's way and reduces that risk to basically none. So this was another way that we enhance the resiliency of this part of the High Line. On our bridge crossings, primarily along Highway 192, back 100 years ago when these pipes were put into place, they were put along historic bridges. They were, put in probably with not a lot of money, and unfortunately, for various reasons, they ended up on the upstream side of bridges, or in fact, under the bridge, exposed to the flow. We've opted to not put those back in those locations. We've located all of our creek crossings on the downstream side of bridges, level with the bridge deck, so the bridge deck itself helps to protect the line should we have any future debris flow that in fact impacts the bridge. We have existing emergency backup power at most of our facilities, 8 out of 9 of our pump stations, at both of our treatment plants, at our admin office. But we do have one pump station that does not have power, Barker Pass. And our shop, which also serves as our emergency operations center, does not currently have backup power. And so we've applied through FEMA for 404 grant funding, and we've been tentatively approved to purchase a generator for Barker Pass. So we will have all of our pump stations now on emergency backup power, and we're also purchasing one for our shop, so that our emergency operations center, if need to be used in the future, will have backup power. In addition, we've applied for FEMA funding, 404 grant funding, to install automatic transfer switches, and very briefly, these are put into place so that when there's a power failure, the generator, the power switches from Edison to the generator automatically. It helps with a smoother transition, less downtime. And so these we have at several of our locations, but we've been approved to add them at our other locations. We will be rebuilding Alder Creek Flume, which about half of it was constructed of wood. The other half burnt down in the fire in the 60s and was reconstructed of steel, and that's what you see there on the right side. So we will be rebuilding the rest of the flume in a similar fashion with steel, so that if there's any future fire, Alder Flume will still be standing. As I mentioned, the fire heavily impacted the water quality at Jameson. We had increased levels of organics, which result in increased levels of disinfection byproducts. And so and this is a problem that's exacerbated by the fire, but exists pre-fire, and we expect that it will exist going forward as well. So this project, which will benefit us as a result of the fire, will benefit us long-term as well, helping to keep us in compliance with the disinfection byproducts regulation. Essentially, we're blowing air into one of our reservoirs across the surface, and we're spraying the water down on top of the reservoir, and the air actually strips the disinfection byproducts out of the water. The structures at Jamison Lake, we are in the design process at the moment, hopefully to get to construction before the end of summer. We will be rebuilding those with fire resiliency in mind. The buildings will, rather than being raised foundations, which is fire prone, they will be slabs on grade. We will be looking at building the material, using building material that's fire resistant. It'll be to fire code, so there will be fire sprinklers as well, and we'll be making sure that there's more defensible space than we previously had. We're also in discussions with the Clean Coalition. It's an organization that is approaching the community, various entities in the community, about a community microgrid energy system. Essentially, it's renewable energy. It's solar and battery backup that would be installed on various key facilities within the district, within the community. They've considered the water district's headquarters to be one of those. And so we are in discussions with them on a potential agreement whereby they would fund the installation of solar panels and batteries at our office to power both our office and our shop, which serves as our emergency operations center. We do and will have diesel-powered generators, which will stay in place, so we'll have redundant emergency power supplies if, in fact, this does proceed. On the communications end, during the debris flow, Cox cable was damaged, and we were without phones, email, and internet for a very short time. We were able to get Frontier in and provide email and internet. During that downtime, we were solely reliant on cell phones, so thankfully cell phones continued to operate. But going forward, we've opted to keep Cox and Frontier so that we have a redundant system. If in fact we do encounter another emergency, we will not have a period of time where communication is an issue. We've also acquired Everbridge emergency notification system. This is a program that enables us to connect with our customers more quickly. It's similar to say what the county has. The county actually has Everbridge. So we're able to send out notifications, whether it's a boil water notice or other emergency notification, to either isolated areas or to district-wide ourselves. And so we'll have that at our fingertips to use in the event we need to going forward. We're also working with the county on an agreement to share our customers' utility information, and for the sole purpose of improving their ability to communicate with our customers in particular during a future emergency. And so there's new legislation out there that enables the county to acquire contact information from utility companies to further enhance their communication system, and they've chosen us to be kind of a guinea pig and see how the process goes. So we're in the process of working with them on that. And then to wrap up, just a couple of other items that I thought were relevant that I should mention. Water supply reliability is certainly something that was resiliency. It's something that we're focused on at the moment. Just wanted to point out that we've acquired groundwater storage rights in the Central Valley. The purpose of this is to take surplus state water and put it into a groundwater basin to call upon in the future during future droughts when maybe the state water project allocation is low or we're in need of additional water. It basically improves the reliability of the state water project for Montecito and Summerland. We're also in the process of implementing the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which you may all be familiar with. It's new legislation that helps creates long-term protection for the Montecito groundwater basin. The Groundwater Sustainability Agency, which is the agency that will develop a plan and implement that plan to ensure that the basin is managed sustainably, met for the first time last month and will begin developing the plan going forward. We have through 2021 to develop that plan. So it's quite a process, but we've begun it. We're also continuing with discussions with the City of Santa Barbara on a long-term water supply agreement. The district's board and the city council approved the term sheet in January, and we're working with attorneys now to draft the agreement. We're targeting midsummer for presenting a draft agreement to our boards, respective governing bodies, and the public for input. And then lastly, we are working with Montecito Sanitary District on the acquisition of recycled water. We completed a feasibility study in December of 2018, and that study recommended a non-potable reuse project using Montecito Sanitary's wastewater for application on some commercial properties within the district. We are now in the process of refining that scope by performing some additional technical studies that are currently underway. And with that, if there's any questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Any questions from commissioners?
Yes, I have a couple questions. First of all, you mentioned the idea of a potential agreement with a microgrid energy partnership, and I was wondering if that partnership is not consummated, would you consider moving forward on your own for alternative energy sources, like the example you showed, the solar panels, or is that something that only will be procured by this partnership?
Commissioner, we are actively considering, we have been considering the installation of solar to offset some of our power. This particular system, yes, would if it's successful, it will, we will have solar sooner than later there at our office. We've been looking and have spoke to several solar providers about a larger system that would offset power costs at various other district facilities, and not just the district office and the district shop, which is what this system will primarily do.
Okay, thank you. One more question. I appreciate this, what you talked about, the recycling efforts. I was also curious, is there any exploration for deep cold water exploration that you have in mind on your properties for acquisition of a greater water supply?
There is not at this time.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other commissioner questions? For myself, if I may, I just have two. First, is the treatment sufficient now so that the water supply from Jameson is being utilized? And second, have there been any enhancements made to the resilience of the state water system so that deliveries into and from Kachuma, upon which the Montecito Water District depends in part, are more resilient?
Commissioner, to your first question regarding Jameson, we are currently delivering a very small amount of water from Jameson. We are able to blend water from Jameson with a significant amount of groundwater that we're receiving through Dalton Tunnel. And so that enables us to deliver a small amount. We're essentially diluting the organics to a level that our treatment plant can treat. Within probably the next 2 weeks, the blower that you saw there in the picture, the construction will be complete, and we will begin the testing process. Assuming that test proves it to be successful, which we are fairly confident that it will, we will get Department of Drinking Water's approval to begin increasing the deliveries quite substantially. To your second question regarding the State Water Project enhancements, I'm not aware of any enhancements that are currently underway. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'm not aware of anything significant in the State Water Project. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Are there any members of the public that have any questions? All right, well, if not, thank you, Mr. Turner, and for coming today and for the informational presentation. Did you have something, Commissioner Center? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Gabriel, we're ready to hear from you. If you could turn on the microphone, please.
Yeah. I'm Diane Gabriel, General Manager and District Engineer of the Montecito Sanitary District. And it's a pleasure to be here to provide information regarding the resiliency of the Montecito Sanitary District. in summary and in answer of your specifics, Mr. Chair, the sanitary district had no damage from the Thomas fire itself. My presentation will show the types of damage that we sustained from the debris flow event, all of which have been permanently repaired and were permanently repaired prior to the repopulation of the Montecito community. So first, before I get started, I should point out that making the Montecito Sanitary District resilient began long before January 9th, 2018. In fact, had we not worked for years beforehand to build the necessary relationships, replace aging infrastructure, maintain a competent professional workforce, and accumulate appropriate financial reserves, we might still be recovering from the Thomas Fire debris flow event. So my presentation will explain what made the Montecito Sanitary District resilient in the first place and what we've done since the debris flow to improve what was already a very resilient organization. And this is really who we are. We serve about a 9 square mile area of Montecito, a population of 9 to 10,000 people. We have over 3,000 properties that we serve. This is a 24-hour a day, every day of the week, every day of the year operation. We do that with 17 full-time employees. We maintain 75 miles of gravity sewer pipeline, over 2,000 manholes and cleanouts. We have 5 sanitary sewer lift stations, and we operate a wastewater treatment plant that treats all the wastewater. So this is the water used inside the homes and businesses in Montecito. We treat that at a treatment plant and discharge the fully secondary treated effluent to the Pacific Ocean through a 1,500-foot outfall pipeline that diffuses the treated effluent into the ocean off of Butterfly Beach. Nick has already provided you with the definition of resilience, so we are going to give you the top 10 reasons why Montecito Sanitary is resilient and was able to complete and timely recover from the Thomas Fire debris flow event. Reason number 10, preparedness was and is incorporated into the sanitary district daily routines and our processes. So when the county issued this evacuation order on January 7th, it was really no different than what our normal storm preparations would be. This is where our treatment plant is. We have, at the time, we had 4 sewer lift stations. You may know that Miramar Sewer Lift Station is now online. That's why my prior stat said 5. We're ready to man and have communications with these facilities 24/7 every day of the year. So really every night we are ready to respond to some kind of sanitary sewer emergency. Really didn't make any difference to us that evening. Reason 9, highly competent certified staff. This is very important. And under the leadership of Alex Alonso, who's here with me today, he's the sanitary district's operations manager. We have a highly trained and dedicated staff. And thankfully, they know our pipeline system. So when the landscape changed, when trees moved and homes moved and things were buried, we were still able to find our manholes and identify. We spray painted it green there so we could find it again. But under all of the changing landscape, we were able to uncover things and get in. Again, here's another manhole in a very changed landscape. Lots of boulders. Reason 8, Montecito Sanitary District was and continues to be financially prepared. Back in June of 2007, the governing board of directors of the sanitary district followed the recommendation of their finance committee at the time, which included Dan Idelson, former member of this wonderful commission, and the late Harry Hovey. They recommended to the board that we increase our emergency reserve fund from $800,000 to $1.5 million. Thankfully, those funds were there. We spent about $1.6 million making the necessary repairs from the debris flow event. I'm happy to report that currently there is $1.6 million in that fund again because we have been fully reimbursed. Reason 7, an experienced governing board of directors acted decisively. This is the minutes from the emergency meeting that our board of directors held at 10 a.m. on January 11th. They declared a state of emergency for the sanitary district, which enabled us to formally waive the bidding process, the public bidding process, and we could enter into emergency contracts to get the necessary work done. Reason 6, long-time working relationships with other sanitary agencies. We have extreme appreciation for these agencies that loaned us their trained professionals. Goleta Sanitary District, City of Santa Barbara, their wastewater division, Carpinteria Sanitary District. Without their personnel, trained personnel, again, this is a manhole. They weigh about 75 pounds. We have 2,000 of them that had to be uncovered, removed, looked into, and the damage assessed. Reason 5, our staff has established long-term working relationships with contractors and engineering professionals. So when we called on them, they responded. They were dedicated to us. They were familiar with us. They were committed to working 24 hours a day until the job was done. And I'll show you the types of things that were performed. Here we have a sewer cleaning machine. As you can imagine, as sewer manholes, the shafts that lead up to the surface of the ground, some of them were sheared off. Mud and debris entered into the sewer system, into the sewer pipelines, the buried pipelines. So we had to get sewer cleaning machines into locations like this. And here they're vacuuming out the sewer. So this is the manhole, the pipeline's buried. We're taking mud and debris out of the sewer system and bringing it to the wastewater treatment plant for proper treatment and disposal. And I'm happy to report throughout this whole time, we did not have one violation to our outfall permit, our ocean outfall discharge. The next step was to actually video inspect the inside of these lines. So again, we're talking 75 miles of pipeline that might have been impacted by this. So we had contractors respond and put the video camera inside the pipeline. So here you have on the computer screen inside that van that was on the prior shot, we still see lots of debris inside the line. That line needs to be cleaned. That material needs to be removed. We had some very challenging situations. Again, this is a pipeline. This is an 8-inch diameter pipe. We have about a 6-inch, 7-inch cobble inside the pipeline. Challenging to remove material like that. Back to my reasons for resiliency. Number 4, capital improvement program that is funded and executed. And again, I give great appreciation to our finance committee of the district back in 2007, who saw fit to fund a capital program. And this is a map of the district. You can see all the lines. These are all our sewer lines, 75 miles of lines scattered throughout the district. But every line that's in red has been rehabilitated. So most of the pipelines were put in the early 60s. But since 2007, the lines in red have been given 80 to 100 years of life with an in situ liner. They've been rehabilitated. So the condition of our infrastructure to start was in very good condition. The remaining pipes, the remaining 49 some miles of pipe, are either the newer PVC pipe or the older clay pipe, but have been identified to be still in very good working condition, not in need of rehabilitation at this time. Reason 3, our management staff is knowledgeable in the FEMA reimbursement process. We had the proper forms. We set up our recovery work such that we would readily get reimbursed from FEMA, and we did. Of the $1.6 million in expenditures, we have been reimbursed over $1.5 million. Reason 2, we remained in control of the recovery work. So when you see in the field damage like this is a manhole, completely sheared off, pipeline here, completely crushed. When you look at devastation like this and the destruction of the community and the small agency that we are, we had some thinking that as a small agency we wouldn't be able to do this all ourselves, and that we should turn it over to, we'll just say, the authorities. We remained cooperative, we coordinated, we stayed on the schedules we were given to work where we were allowed to work when we were told we could work, which meant we were working night and day. We coordinated with everyone, but we didn't allow their problems to become our problems, and we didn't allow them to take over what is our responsibility as a sanitary agency, to provide the community with collection, treatment, and disposal of wastewater. And reason number 1, the Montecito Sanitary District follows standards of practice of the wastewater industry. And that includes having backup generators. So all the facilities I showed you earlier, our treatment plant, our lift stations, they have backup generators. So we did not experience any power failures. Well, there's supposed to be a picture of an auto transfer switch. We have auto transfer switches. Nice little box. There we go. That's what they look like. Our facilities are outfitted with auto transfer switches. We have on-site diesel storage. So during the Thomas fire, some of our generators ran for weeks. We had the ability, if, say, we couldn't get regular deliveries from McCormick's, we have our own diesel. We can refuel our generators. And it should our generators fail, we have auxiliary pumps and piping that would do the job even if that generator didn't start. This pump is also diesel fueled. And now we move on to today. I gave you the reasons why we're resilient to begin with, but this is what we're faced with now. It's these risk areas. We're all familiar with this red zone map. And as you've seen from prior slides, we have pipelines that run all through this area. If a debris flow event were to happen again, we need to protect our pipes. We don't want that mud and debris to get into the lines. So one of the things, and I'd say a major thing that we've done, is fabricate pipeline protectors. Now this might look like a simple piece of plywood that you can fold in half with some strings attached, right? Well, it's actually genius. here's a manhole, okay, the shaft that goes down to the pipe below. If the lid of the manhole were to get compromised, float away, get sheared off, we have a secondary lid, if you will. You can't see the pipe below. So if mud and debris were to get into the shaft, it will not get into the pipe. If it gets into the pipe, given the gravity nature of our pipeline system, it will flow downstream. We'll have 75 miles of pipeline to clean again, perhaps. So we have these, you see a staff person installing one. We have these installed in about 80 locations, primarily in our high-risk areas in the red zone. The other thing we've done is we're continuing to try to educate ourselves while we educate others. We've been asked to present to various professional organizations our experience, and when we do that, we learn from others. This isn't the only disaster that's happened. We communicate with other professionals in our industry. We're constantly trying to learn while we educate. And we are assisting property owners. This is not a new program. We've had this even before the debris flow, but it has become very popular. We have a lateral rebate program. So if an individual property's private lateral was damaged during the debris flow, they can get up to $2,000 back from the district for making the required repairs. We've also worked with individual insurance companies because if they do have insurance, we do feel that we've shown evidence that the lateral was impacted by mud and debris, and that should be covered by their insurance. But in the event that it's not, they can recover $2,000 from the district. And with that, I'm open to any comments, questions. I invite any and all of you to come for a tour of the wastewater treatment plant, where we can go into more detail of what we do. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's been helpful to us and informative. So first, are there any questions from any commissioners? Commissioner Sanauer?
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have sort of an ancillary question. Not everyone is on the sewer system, right? There's septic fields. What percentage is that, and are you working proactively? I'm sure you always work proactively to see if they could connect. But was in this event, the septic fields and them being compromised probably contributed to some contamination, maybe not. But so what percentage is still on septic in your area? Thank you.
Commissioner Sinauer, members of the commission. We have properties within the district boundary that are still on septic. We've worked very proactively to get areas that are on septic off of sewer. One thing to note is that property owners have to pay. So it's when there's interest and willingness to pay. The sanitary district has a terrific program where we will carry the cost of properties that decide to defer their involvement, but when and if they ever decide to connect, they then have to reimburse the district their proportionate share of the construction cost plus interest. We have actively recently worked on a sewer main extension for Olive Road that was recently completed, getting 11 more properties onto the sewer system. We're currently designing another sewer main extension on Romero Canyon. There was one that was completed very soon, right around the Thomas Fire time, the lower Romero area. And we're also working within Riven Rock, within the Riven Rock development. There is sewer in Riven Rock Road, but within the Riven Rock development. So we're currently working there. But as far as numbers go, there's roughly about, I would say, 100 properties that are on septic with what we call sewer available, because there is no mandatory connection unless county environmental health determines that their septic system isn't working properly. And I guess I should go on the record as saying in some areas, it is perfectly fine and a proper way to treat wastewater by having a septic system. There are definitely properties within our service area that are properly served by septic systems.
For myself, I just have two questions, and I should have actually asked this of Mr. Turner as well. I'm sure it's of interest to the community and for us to know as well. Have the credit ratings or the insurability of your systems been affected by the Thomas Fire and or debris flow? You spoke about particularly your financial reserves for your respective agencies. So to speak, the rubber meets the road in the ratings of your respective agencies from a financial perspective of the public markets. And second of all, have the insurance markets at all reacted to the disaster with respect to either of your districts?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the Standard & Poor's rating of the Montecito Sanitary District still remains as AA+, which is excellent for a small agency. We have had no financial impact at all. Our insurance claims were not large. Our insurance premiums have not been raised. And I guess I should report one more time. We have been audited, so as part of the FEMA reimbursement process, it's a requirement to do a single audit. That has been done of our agency, and that audit came back clean.
All right, thank you. Mr. Turner?
Commissioner Newman, commissioners, our credit rating was not impacted as a result of the fire or the debris flow. We were contacted by Standard & Poor's not too long after the debris flow. They wanted to conduct a review, but ultimately nothing came of that, and so our credit rating remains the same, not impacted by the disasters. As far as the insurance markets responding to this, there really hasn't been much change. We have Aqua JPIA as our insurance carrier. They've been incredible to work with, very quick to respond, have approved nearly every request we've had of them to recover costs associated with various types of damage. So, but as far as the impact to our premium, there has not been any change in that as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other commissioner questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Commissioner Police.
Thank you. Diane, Gabriel, Mrs. In the future regarding reclaimed water, is there a long-term plan as far as increasing the infrastructure to allow for the collection of gray waters or otherwise reclaiming water that could be used for some of these ways that presently the Montecito Water Company is using their water?
Well, Chairman Police, I'm not sure I follow your question. I'll go back to maybe the basics of what water comes to our treatment facility is the water that's used inside homes. So the inside water, inside homes and resorts and businesses in Montecito. That is wastewater that could be recycled to be reused, and I believe Nick mentioned it in his presentation. The current thought is that it would be used what is called non-potable reuse, so irrigation water. And our closest customer probably is the cemetery right across the way. And this summer we will have a small pilot project that is going to demonstrate some newer technologies that are not currently used here in this area, meaning Goleta Sanitary District or the City of Santa Barbara. When they recycle water, the technology we're thinking of using or going to demonstrate is using a pulse-fed reverse osmosis system with some ultrafiltration prior to that. So a higher quality irrigation water that may be at some time suitable for golf course irrigation.
So is that planned down the road? Like, is it in your budget to design or otherwise hire a consultant to design something?
Well, as far as the sanitary district goes, I can't speak for the water district. The sanitary district is not the water purveyor, So we do not have authority to purvey water of any kind within our district boundary. But we stand at the ready to provide that
So
to
it
the
sounds like
water.
we need some cooperation between the two organizations to make this happen.
Well, we've been meeting jointly. There's a joint committee meeting scheduled for June 4th. This will be our third meeting that members of the Montecito Water District and Montecito Sanitary District are meeting together to discuss just that. The Water District has a report that has identified a project which would be this non-potable reuse of water. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Turner, do you want to?
Sure,
add
I can
something
add
to
to that. So, from the Water District's perspective, we budgeted in last year's fiscal budget to complete the feasibility study, which we completed in December of last year. We are budgeting in this upcoming fiscal year to fund the technical studies that will help refine the scope of the ultimate project, whether it's an NPR project that's small or large, or whether it's an IPR project where we're injecting water into the groundwater basin, assuming that is feasible. At some point, we'll have a project that's fully defined, and then at that point, the districts, and specifically the Water District, will be considering how to fund that. We would ultimately have to go through some sort of a Prop 218 process to increase rates to cover the cost of whatever project is ultimately defined. So.
All right. Well, I want to thank both of you for coming today and for your presentations. They're informative and helpful. And I will say, I think all of us in our community are basically comforted and assured that your respective special districts will continue to serve Montecitoans as you have in the past, and in the future that you are better positioned, heaven forbid, should we have emergency circumstances as were presented to us in the Thomas Fire and debris flow. And we thank you and your respective governing boards, your employees and all for those efforts. So, and thank you for coming today. All right. Proceeding on with the agenda and continuing to focus on things Thomas related, we'll next go to the next agenda item.
Chair, new members of the commission, do we just have a brief update in regards to the information that we've been sharing with the Montecito Planning Commission? In addition, Supervising Planner Joe Dargle is here with me, and he's been making some efforts in consolidating data and portraying it to the commission and the public to give an idea of what the data is showing. And I can turn it over to him if you would like, for him to just kind of give a brief update on the new reports that we're continuing to provide to the commission.
Please.
Thank you, commissioners. So if I could have you turn your attention to the disaster case summary by status report that was provided in your packet today. So it's come up during previous discussions about how we're tracking the different cases or the different properties that were impacted by the flood, and this report was prepared to show what our planners that are acting as case managers for each of these properties, what they're dealing with when they're dealing with the different property owners. And so these different percentages show whether or not work has been completed on the site, or whether or not there's been any contact at all. If the owners are on hold waiting for a pending sale of the property. So there's just multiple different categories that we decided were the most relevant to share with the commission and to categorize these projects into. So that's going to be the first report. Then the second report that I would bring your attention to. Sure.
Just wait a minute, we'll get the visual to catch up with your presentation.
Okay, so we can just go through this report. So, why is this? Oh, download. Okay, so for the report that you see on your screen, this is the ATC summary report, and this report specifically is summarizing the safety assessments that were completed at the beginning of the disaster event. So that was in January 9th of 2018, and then the current posting, placard posting for each of those original inspections. So if you'll look at the numbers associated with the different cards, you can see that the number of green statuses have increased significantly. And so what that means is those properties that were affected by the flood could have been, if they had a red or a yellow tag, those in order for that to change to green, that could mean the structures were either repaired or there was a demolition permit received, and now they have been demolished, so that the property could be empty. So this is not a good indication of whether or not the homes have been repaired. It's simply a safety status for the property, for the structure. Was there a question on this one?
Commissioner Senor?
Thank you, Joe, very much. Referring to this on the screen now, it says between 1/1/18 and 7/1/2018. Is that correct? So.
That's correct. Yeah, go.
So Chair Newman, members of the commission, so that date range there is set by the system, so that way we're pulling any records that would have been associated with the Thomas Fire and debris flow. And so we specifically set that date range because in July 4th or so was the holiday fire. So we're excluding out that data. So we're looking at all the data in the county as far as the department goes. And so this report is specifically focused on the debris flow and the Thomas fire. So that's why that date range is in there.
And I could elaborate a little bit more on that too. So this refers to what we call ATCs, which is something that it's a record in our data system. And when we pull on all ATCs within that time frame, if there's a later inspection not within this date range that's associated with the ATC, it will show. So you are going to see changes to those ATCs that are recent as of last week.
And ATC, please, is?
I'm actually not sure what that.
That's fine. Thank you.
It's an internal acronym. Yeah.
All right. Continuing on.
No, I can pull that one up if you want. I did. Okay. Sure. Okay, so thank you for your patience. Continuing on with this next report, this is a list of all of the different permits that have been submitted, applications have been submitted, and then the associated permits that have been issued associated with those applications. So as you'll see, we continue to see building permits do continue get approved, and as well as planning permits. So I would actually direct you to this report here to show a little bit better visual of this information. So all of the information that was shown on that report is shown visually in these graphs here. And essentially the message that we're seeing from the data is that there are projects that are continually getting approved slowly. So since you last saw this report last month, we have had an increase in exemptions that were approved. And so we went from in February, there had been 21 exemptions, like-for-like exemptions that had been approved, and now we're at 37. So there's been 16 since February.
And if I may, while we're on this, is the closure of the data through May 15th on both the first page and the graph page?
The data that is included in these reports is from, it was current as of Wednesday of last week. And so these reports are dated today's date because of the hearing date.
But the data is through May 15th.
So today's May 15th. And so
Oh,
the
I'm
data
sorry.
is
Excuse me.
through
Okay.
Wednesday of last week, May 7th or 8th. You'll see on the report, it's printed on May 7th. That's
I
the
see.
date of the report. Okay, and last, I'll just bring your attention to the previous report that we already discussed, and this just shows a visual of the case status summary that has been categorized by the case managers for each of the open disaster cases. Were there any questions on this figure?
I got one question. That being, you have here on hold awaiting owner's action. Is that something that changes very much, or does that remain pretty steady at that number?
Chair and Commissioner Police, that number does fluctuate, and it's hard to say at this point in time because we've only been tracking these specific categories for a short time, whether or not it fluctuates greatly. But I would say that it's slowly changing because the process does take time for insurance companies and for property owners to work with their insurance companies and work through the questions that have come up. So I would say probably the answer to your question is that no, it does not change greatly.
Other questions?
And Chair, just to add, and members of the commission, just to add on what Joe was, or Mr. Dargle was talking about earlier, to respond to your question, because when you look at the process, they interact with staff, either flood control or planning or building safety, and they receive information, and then they take that information and make some decisions about it. Or do you want to pursue a like for like? They want to do a rebuild? They want to do just repairs? So like the action that we had earlier today, there's a lot of decisions that individual had as far as the options that they had. So we do see a change in those. When you look at the orange and blue categories, we see a change as they interact with the department or the county agencies. So there is a change back and forth as they become active and either get a permit, or sometimes they go back and forth between those two categories as they make some certain decisions. And so you'll see an ebb and flow between those two numbers as we begin to work with, or as we're working with the property owners.
Commissioner Seno?
Yes, I would just like to basically support that finding, in that this is a complex dynamic. And I think that project we have prior on Pope Salipo is evidence of the time it takes, the back and forth it takes, and I think these relationships and proportions will change, but it's complex and it's methodical. And so many of our community are dealing with this daily, but I do believe they have support, and I think these graphs and numbers do show that there is progress being made, and it's just very complex, and which this reflects. So, onward.
Commissioner Kupiec?
Yeah, I just want to clarify for my own knowledge. I mean, I'm looking at the number of residential new permits that have been applied for. These are about affected properties, or are these total numbers in the county?
Through the chair, that is actually affected properties. That is not total for the county. So you're looking at the permits for Montecito Rebuilding and Recovery Summary Report.
Where I see 3 residential new structures, 3 applied.
Okay, yeah. So everything on this sheet is related to a disaster case, and those are the number of coastal development permit applications that we have received in response to the disaster case.
Oops, sorry.
Okay, if there are no more commissioner questions, let me just add one comment. First, an appreciation for the graphs. I think it's visually appealing and helpful and demonstrative. And second, I'd like to address one thing on the disaster case summary by status. Roughly 25% of the affected property owners have not responded to one form or another of outreach to the county. And I would just say to those members of our community who may be watching today that indeed we are here to help you. Our government, our planning and development department is here to help you recover from the Thomas debris flow, to restore your property as you might wish and desire, and to aid you through that process. And indeed, we had one very excellent case of that today on our agenda. So to those of you who are in that 24.9%, please do contact the Planning and Development Department in the county, get in touch with your liaison, and do what you can, as we will do what we can to restore your property. All right. Well, thank you for that report, and we'll see you next month with new data. We'll then move on to our last agenda item, which is Commissioner's request for future agenda topics. So I'll start on my left. Commissioner Police, is there any topic for future agenda items that you'd like to see us address?
Not at this moment, thank you.
Your experience speaks to you. Commissioner Senauer.
As far as agencies coming before us, as today, we had sanitary and the water district. I think it would be appropriate and timely to have the fire protection district come before us to give basically an update and a sort of heads up. Summer's on its way, and just an informative presentation as we had today. Soon. Thank you.
Commissioner Kupiec, any topics of interest to you?
You know, this could have been a question to the water district subsequently, but, you know, as a voyeur, I mean, I couldn't help but every couple of days I look and see where Lake Kachuma is, and, you know, we're at 80% capacity right now, and everybody breathes a sigh of relief. But, you know, some of our policies about how we've kind of trained our community to conserve water, you know, also the issues of, you know, what does the future look like? Are we still pursuing, you know, a desal plant, our own, you know, pairing up with the city? I mean, you know, it's nice to know that we've got 80% capacity of water, but I start wondering, you know, what does the future look like? You know, where are we 5 or 10 years from now? You know, I mean, we could be facing a drought, you know, and how are we preparing for that aspect of the future of climate change?
All right, thank you for that. For myself, I have a couple things to mention. First, for our July 17th meeting, as I said earlier, Cox will be available and will present, as did our special districts today, and hopefully we will extend and have invitations accepted by Southern California Edison, Southern California Gas, Verizon, and Frontier as well. Number two, I'd like to suggest that we consider for our June meeting or a soon meeting, have our staff take us on an e-tour of our new P&D website, so that not only as commissioners but members of the public that will want to know how to navigate that site and find its resources most efficiently might have the benefit of that, and perhaps in a workshop format. And another topic I think for consideration would be for us to, as a commission, review and discuss our own procedures. They've not been revised since 2003, and looking at them, I just noted some things that don't seem to be followed today. Now, whether that's a matter of practice or what have you, as an example, and this is a truly minor one, but it specifies in the procedures that our meetings will be held on the second Wednesday of every month. We happen to be meeting on the third Wednesdays. Now, it does say that can be changed by motion. So I don't know where changes have occurred necessarily that speak to those procedures, and I think it's probably worth it, particularly with our recent addition to the commission, for us to take a look at those and see, do they serve us well presently? Are they accurate, and what revisions might be in order? So those are my own thoughts. Staff, anything to add before we conclude?
Chair Newman, members of the commission, we don't have anything to add. Thanks.
Commissioner Senower?
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about the June 19th. It could be June or July, having Crown Castle come or not, but right now it is scheduled. And I was wondering what the protocol would be, as MBAR had a site visit, which I was not able to attend. What is the protocol and appropriateness of a site visit for the commission? Would we do it individually? Would we could do it two? We can't have a quorum. What if you could sort of clarify, council or whoever, what would be appropriate to see these sites with actually the Crown Castle as MBAR had? Thank you.
Chair and commissioners, speaking of the your procedure manual from 2003, there are provisions in there that provide some information on site visitations. I'm just trying to pull them up now. I believe that they offer or encourage commissioners to reach out to the assigned staff person from planning. And Commissioner Senower, you are correct that any site visit would involve fewer than a quorum of the commission.
All right. Well, having no further business or matters, Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting of May 15th.
I so move.
It's been moved. Been moved and seconded. We adjourn. All in favor? Aye. Okay. Thank you all.